Welcome to Module 4. We are in week 4. This week we're going to talk about finance plan options for films in varied budget ranges. So we're starting at the under $1 million range. We're going to the mid-budget range up to 15 million, and then we're going into the high budget range, 15 million to 30 million and up. And each of these ranges have different distribution and finance models that apply in view of profitability. Now, looking at the finance plan options for films in varied budget ranges, we need to look at financing and distribution options for all the various budgets, low budget, mid to high budget, and understand the varied project requirements and distribution options for each of these budget ranges, as well as the financing and risk associated components in regards to the low, mid, and high budget range. In comparison to that is also the market demand and conditions for films in the varied budget ranges, which are very different depending on what kind of movie it is, what kind of genre it is, and what kind of budget it is. So we'll talk about the optimal financing plans for these varied budget ranges in connection with the market that would be able to afford them, but also is often looking for specifically those kind of movies in specific budget ranges. And when I talk about low budget, it's mainly buyers who are looking for streaming and television titles. When we're talking about mid to high budget range films, we're talking about buyers who are looking for films that can be theatrically released. Looking at investment considerations for the varied budget ranges in low, medium, and high budgeted films, we see some benefits and some risks. So when we start with low budgeted movies, obviously the benefit is we don't have to invest so much. So that's a low entry place for any investor thinking we're going to start slowly, we're going to invest a little bit of money, and we are a little risk averse as investors and we don't want to write a big check. So low budget movies are ideal for those people. We then have to look at the recoupment positioning for that. Given the low budget movies don't have the same financing plans as the medium and high budget movies, the likelihood of an investor being in first recoupment position is very high because there might not be a bank involved, for example. The potential high returns due to the low investments are an absolute benefit if the film is well executed and distributed. Alternative distribution options for low budget films are very interesting, specifically in the direct to video and also the niche content distribution platform areas. We have defined buyers in these low budget ranges. We do have diverse genres, and of course we do have some festival award options with low budget movies. Now the risks we're dealing with often when we look at low budget movies, we have low production quality. That happens quite a bit with low budget movies, which makes it very hard to sell them. We have distribution that is not defined right at the beginning, so we don't really know how to best distribute. That was not kept in mind when the film was designed and the project was put together. We have to think about the festival selection volatility because it is not a given that our film will be selected by a festival or even win something. There is a risky finance plan here because some of the finance elements that work with the medium and high budget will not work here. And the loss of capital is pretty high for low budget movies. Now, when we look at medium budget movies, the investment amount is low to medium. This is also an option for risk-averse investors subject to the finance plan and their positioning. We do have some options here where we can apply the financing for the investor not just as equity but maybe as debt. The medium budget range films must be commercially viable in order to be distributed optimally. The targeted and defined audience as well as the genre is absolutely important. We can't just willy-nilly produce something and we don't know who the audience is. The optimizable distribution options are including theatrical release possibilities. We have other streaming possibilities, of course. We have the option here to add theatrical release to the medium budget range, which is not often something we can do with low budget movies. we can structure a risk-averse finance plan, and we do have the option to have a more commercial product because we can add commercial cast given we have a little bit more money available. We often have a much more experienced production team that provides a high production quality, and we have track record included in talent, production, and anyone involved because it can be afforded in that budget range. Now the risks here is these films are somewhat execution driven. Oftentimes they're pre-sold, so the execution driven component is somewhat minimalized depending on how many pre-sales were done. They are market sensitive. If, for example, pre-sales don't support the estimates, that means the market is shifting or the film is not delivering on what buyers were hoping for. And of course, like with low budget, the medium budget too, the loss of capital is absolutely a possibility for investors. Let's look at the high budget movies. The benefits here obviously include we have a lot more money to deliver on a top production quality, and we can hire A-level actors. We can often talk to studios and streamers about co-production licensing deals because these high budgeted movies are interesting to them. We can have an investment that can be combined with a studio or streamer deal. We do have, again here too, targeted and defined audiences and genres that are very defined. We have some franchise options and ancillary IP options, which are not necessarily a given with the medium or low budget movies. We have very high rankings in the marketability because the market wants these kind of movies if they're done for a price that the market can afford. So the distribution options are much wider, specifically because theatrical release is a real possibility. And we do have the studio expertise included here if we have the studio releasing the film, which elevates the film in general because the brand of the studio gives it prestige. Now the risks are, if we do a deal with a studio or a streamer, there's sometimes a lack of transparency. The market sensitivity is a point here because sometimes the buyers cannot afford high budget movies. And of course we have an additional cost here, which is the P&A that is needed to release the film in the theaters. So when we're looking at these different projects and we have to assess them, we need to think about what criteria do we use to assess films in order to decide whether or not they could be profitable or not. So as an investor, for example, here at our company, we always look at exactly those criteria to then decide, are we making this movie or not? Are we investing in this movie or not? And these assessment criteria they're not just ours, there are other production companies and investors' criteria just as well. So obviously we're doing a script analysis where we not only look at the writing skills of the writer to make sure the writer is experienced and the script follows dramaturgical elements that are important, but we're also looking at the market appeal, which has to do with the genre, the uniqueness of the story and the characters and the dialogue, of course, and the relevance of the story in general in relation to today. We do some market research where we are looking at audience preferences, we're looking at trends, we're looking at market dynamics, we're specifically looking at who is our demographic, what are their genre preference, do we need box office data to support this particular product, what kind of social medias and traits do we need to incorporate here, and deals in the traits that we're looking for that need to be incorporated in the specific finance structure or distribution structure that we're aiming for. So we're doing an overall market research in the industry to see where are we standing with our product and is it competitive. We do look at comparative films that are similar to what our film is, and we are looking at their historic numbers. And when we look at comparative films, we're looking at films that have a similar budget, have a similar genre, similar target audience, and then we look at marketing and box office components. And of course, when we look at the assessment criteria, we're including the director, writer, and actor as talent. Hopefully they enhance the project as well as its marketability and commercial appeal. We're looking at the budget and the financing components. So we're looking at the proposed budget that is often sent to us with the film. We're looking at the proposed finance plan and the potential revenue streams. And then we look at projections. And we assess all of this and combine it and make a risk profile for us that will let us know whether or not we should pay as much as is proposed in the budget and in the finance plan. And then we assess the distribution options by looking at potential distribution across a multitude of platforms and territories. So we're looking at theatrical distribution, we're looking at digital distribution, but we're also looking at international distribution components. We want to make sure that the film's criteria do meet a variety of distribution platforms that buy this kind of movie. And this goes for all the budget ranges, for the low budget as well as the mid and the high budget. Everything has its place within those assessment criteria. Now, the importance of the deals that we're making are often connected to the budget in this case. So we're looking at where do we want to spend money, specifically when we have limited funds. So if we're looking at making a movie for low or medium budget, we want to spend the money where it elevates the value for the film. So for example, if you have a very expensive opening and that is kind of what your entire movie rides on, you often see that with action films, that they have this huge, drastic, action-driven, extraordinary opening in the first act, and that's where they oftentimes spend the money because they want the audience to be drawn into the film that way. Now we can do something similar with mid or low budgets depending on our genre and depending on our story, but we have to really think about where do we want to prioritize this. And of course, when we talk about actor salaries and directors, and particularly actors, I should say, it seems often that the revenue that we have to generate for a film requires a certain level of an actor, or the actor that is given to us with the project does not support the budget that is also being suggested. So we are looking at we're looking very closely at the connection between the actor and the budget and the value of the film. And again, this is not just us, but all the financiers and production companies do this. So when we look at talent fees, we are often looking into deferment deals. We're looking into bonuses in order to reduce the budget, still keep the talent. So when we look at new talent, we're really doing that for supporting roles mainly, and we're doing that with casting calls for the talent, which by the way also creates a buzz, creates awareness for the project. And we're doing that when we're combining new talent with A-level talent to test the chemistry and to test if they match. But these are all the things that we do particularly in order to look at the budget and spend the money that we have available in the budget very carefully and very focused in a prioritized way to elevate the value entirely without having to spend an arm and a leg for this movie. So many times when we have to navigate deals, we're talking about profit deals. How do we optimize the value for a project? Oftentimes we have to be feasible with our budget and we still have to keep high-level talent attached. So we're looking at profit sharing deals. They often happen quite a bit with low to mid budget films. And so we have to think about a balance between an experienced director who understands the importance of delivering a commercially viable and top quality product, but also being financially feasible. And we need to think about what can that director put on the screen, and are they okay with the financial constraints that we're putting on them with this budget? So that's a very important and honest conversation that needs to happen. And oftentimes what you'll find is directors who will not be comfortable with the budget that you're suggesting because they just don't know how to do it in a certain budget level. They are very experienced, but they're experienced in a certain budget level. So that's a very intricate conversation that needs to happen, because the director must be pragmatic while being artistically authentic. They need to provide solutions for artistic suggestions that they make. They can't just come to us and say, we're going to solve this problem with money. that's not the way to do it. So we're looking for directors who are, on the one hand, very creative in how they want to tell the story, but also creative in how they want to solve problems. Now, the casting director helps us in navigating budget constraints by understanding that we need a certain cast that will elevate the project, but is not, necessarily asking for the quote that normally is paid to them for a certain movie. So we can work with the casting and the director together in seeing that we can deliver on the vision the director has, but also the vision that we have as producers. The script is the bait, and that's absolutely correct. The script is extremely important for all the budget ranges. It doesn't matter which one, because that is what attracts the director and what attracts the cast, then in combination with the director. And the cast can be bait in this situation, because if we, for example, which I've had happen on some of the movies that I produced, we had cast already attached, but we didn't have a director. And the reason for that was because the films were sent to us by an agency that had the client being the cast, being the talent, and it was their project that they wanted to get financed. So this was an example where I had a project with I forget his name now, Mr. Wick. Oh my God, I can't believe I forget his name is Keanu Reeves. There he is, Keanu Reeves. Keanu Reeves offered me a project that was half in Chinese. At the time, now by the way, this would be not a problem, but at the time, this was a few years ago, we weren't ready yet for projects like these where you had multiple languages, and English was really a minority language. And the movie was made, by the way, and it did not make any money because it was too early for its time. Looking at this now, this would be a very good project to do, given that we're now much more open when it comes to making movies in different languages, and we're used to watching them with subtitles. So it's much more what we do today. Now, when we're talking about deal terms with the director specifically, we have to think about development deals with him or her to develop the script to the best it can be. Oftentimes we do that with the director, but we also do development deals or deals with talent where we talk about profits and bonuses if we are reducing their salary significantly. And that means we're not doing both. We're just doing one. We're either giving them a profit participation or we're giving them a box office bonus, but we're not doing both. The director is key when it comes to obviously creating a strong film and astounding cast performances. It is a beautiful symphony in collaboration, as I call it here, but it is also one that is very much driven by what is the budget level, what is the universe we're in, is this person, is this director the right person for this movie, and that is something to really think about. Many times when I have people come to me, they have mid or high level budget movies and they have a first-time director attached, where I'm just dumbfounded on how anyone would want to give money to that situation. I wouldn't. But in low budget movies, you find that there are very often first-time directors there because that's the first entryway for them to make a movie. And it's not wrong, but in a situation like that, I would always say one should make sure that the producer surrounding that director is very experienced and very strong, and then you really have something. We're looking at profit models for low budget films. We need to really look at distribution considerations because everything has to do with distribution when it comes to profits. So there are different ways on dealing with low budget movies. There is the kind of movie that could warrant a limited release as a strategy, because here we can get critical recognition and award recognition, which will absolutely help with streaming deals. They love this kind of situation. Now, the profit potential is that we have box office if we do a limited release, but oftentimes those are very rare because low budget movies don't necessarily get a wide release. They get a limited release, and then it really comes down to where and how are they being released. And they have to really be released very targeted within the target audience that they're made for in order to generate box office, and that's not always easy to do. The festival circuit obviously is ideal for lower budget movies if the right festivals are chosen and if something has been selected and ideally wins a prize. Then the critical acclaim is absolutely profit elevating because the film is being enhanced through an award. Now, video on demand strategies for low budget movies is actually a great way to direct distribute through iTunes, Amazon, or Google, which is quite popular. The profit potential here depends on the deal that is being done. Is there a flat fee? Is there a revenue share? Is there a performance bonus? How is this direct distribution deal manufactured and how is it implemented? That is very important for any kind of profit to be generated. Streaming, exclusive or non-exclusive, is good for low budget films, ideally with an MG, with a minimum guarantee that is paid for. And now looking at recent announcements from streamers who are more and more going into the lower budget range because they can't afford paying hundreds of millions for these big movies, we do have more opportunity today with this kind of deal structure in getting these movies placed. So the profit potential is elevated, absolutely, especially for deals that are exclusive and give us a license fee upfront, a minimum guarantee upfront. Physical media is something, DVDs and Blu-rays and such, that really only works with collectors who are looking for like a limited cult-like film. So it's not something where I would say to you, this is a big money maker. I think it is valid for low budget movies that have cult character, absolutely. And licensing, you guys know, international rights, hotel, airline rights, etc. They give us additional revenues to the US deals where we can also get a license ideally. And the profit potential here varies absolutely depending on the film and the appeal in the different international marketplaces. And there's a hybrid of things because we can have a limited theatrical release followed by a VOD release. We can do a streaming service right after. We can do a sale to a network broadcaster. We can mix and match. We can do a simultaneous release. There are different ways of combining all the different releases that I have mentioned here, specifically in going from window to window, meaning theatrical first, VOD, streaming, then TV. And this will help us get multiple revenue streams facilitated. Let's take a closer look at the distribution options that are available. So when we talk about direct to digital and VOD, this would be a situation where there is no theatrical release, for example. It goes straight to a digital platform like iTunes, Amazon, Google Play, etc. This would, because there's no theatrical, obviously reduce distribution costs, and it would still allow a global audience to be reached. We can also do deals with Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, etc., where we can get an upfront payment like a minimum guarantee that is offered for more likely an exclusive deal. The iTunes and Amazon and Google Play platforms that are direct to digital do not have to be exclusive, by the way. They can be non-exclusive. But you have to think about, you have to be very careful if you get a deal with Netflix or Hulu or Amazon and you want that, and you did a deal with iTunes that is non-exclusive, then the bigger ones will likely not take your movie because they would want it exclusive. So you should always aim to get the exclusive deal first. And only if you cannot get that for your low budget movie, then you can go direct to digital and do a non-exclusive deal with any of the direct to digital VOD platforms. And there's something like a niche release, and that's a targeted market that would be driven by either a certain piece of content that is a niche content that goes into certain festivals, or that has a special event-like character that attracts a certain kind of audience that is quite unique. But it could also be a niche that delivers on a certain genre, like the horror genre or the comedy genre, depending on what it is. So the niche releases have to do with, most of the time, festival releases, and they are giving us the opportunity to make it a unique premium kind of experience in connection with the festival, if it's possible. And that's, again, not an automatic given, because the festivals have to work with us and they have to nominate us. So when we talk about the festivals, if we get nominated and if we win something, obviously our visibility for the film is much more increased. This will attract a lot of attention from distributors and sales agents and streamers, who obviously love the fact that there is a festival giving us an award. So this is absolutely a saleable element. You are increasing the value of your content by doing this, by going to festivals. But again, you have to be careful which festival you're choosing. You can't just go to a little festival that no one has ever heard of. You need to start with the big ones and then kind of work your way down. We need to have an internationally, universally reliable, relatable theme in order to have our content be internationally successful and work with and find its cultural appeal with the international audience. And if we have a piece of content like that, then we can talk to a sales agent to sell international rights. But many times low budget movies are very particular, and they're not always culturally appealing through many countries. So that's something to think about. In general, I would always think about making the movie for an audience or for a buyer, specifically when it's a low budget movie, because you want to know that you have a buyer before you spend that money. The crowdfunding is actually something that helps in building an audience for low budget movies, and it's a great tool for low budget movies to optimize distribution options, obviously to raise money, but also to optimize distribution options, because you can create a following already early on, which digital platforms like when they buy something that already has a following. And obviously, when we're coming to, how do we handle the production for a low up to $1 million film, I'd like you to really consider talking to Ayatsi to get reduced rates if you want to use union crews, or you can do non-union crews, or you can do profit sharing with your crew in exchange for either not paying them or paying them a lot less. So that's something that a lot of low budget films do, where they give their crew profits in the film and pay them from distribution revenues. The distribution options that I mentioned, again, could be used as a hybrid for the low budget version as well as any other budget. So the key here is to manage the windows, the exploitation windows, in accordance with how they work. First you have theatrical release, then you have VOD, then you have streaming, you have TV. Those are the windows in succession on how the film should be released, and then you can optimize revenues from all the windows. The big risk I see with low budget films is that you want to make sure the money is on the screen and not paid as a producer fee, not paid with some silly things that really don't elevate the production value. It really needs to go on the screen. I would try to utilize new technology that can save me money, some kind of visual effect, or maybe a digital stage, whatever I can do to maintain quality and really elevate the production quality, I would focus on. And of course, you have to also focus on balancing the financing plan, because you're likely not going to do the regular financing plan that you would do with a mid or high budget level, where you do pre-sales and a bank loan and all these things, because with low budget movies, there will likely not be a pre-sale, there will likely not be a bank loan. So that's something for you to really balance carefully. There are other ways to finance low budget films, with grants, with brands, with, as I mentioned, crowdfunding, with deferments for talent, crew, and post-production. There are these kind of ways, and equity. There's absolutely that, but I think the equity should always be combined with the other finance sources that I just mentioned. It should never be a situation where an equity investor pays for the whole movie. It's very risky. Obviously, it's done all the time, but what also happens all the time is that the money is then lost. So when we look at project requirements, for low budget films. In fact, they're the same for mid and high budget films in a lot of ways. We want a very strong script. In this case, if it's a low budget film, we want something that's actually feasible, that we can afford to shoot. The budget needs to be realistic, and as I mentioned earlier, funds need to go on the screen. The casting can be done in a way that it elevates the project if it makes sense for the project. For example, horror doesn't necessarily need cast. You guys know this. So we really need to think about, do we need cast for this particular script, for this particular budget? Or are we in a range where, the story is meaningful, or it is, a certain story that is geared toward like a Hallmark like buyer, where we don't need cast. So that's something to make a decision on. The production schedule needs to be working with the script in a sense that we have only so many days. It's often not more than a week, and it's a very limited shooting schedule, and it needs to be manageable, specifically with the locations that we have. And then we have a lean and mean production crew where many people often wear many hats in order to make it happen. And the post-production is something I really want to say there needs to be money spent, because it can really elevate the production significantly if we have beautiful color correction, if we have great sound, if we have great music. It really makes the movie stand out, particularly when it's a low budget movie. We get a lot of, I believe I mentioned this, low budget movies that have very little production quality. It makes it very hard to sell them, nearly impossible. So when we're talking about distribution options, I want to summarize a few things that we talked about. We want to create a buzz through festivals, through wins, through nominations. We want to try low-cost distribution options, direct to the platform if we can't get a minimum guarantee deal with a VOD platform. If we can do a limited release, either by raising the P&A ourselves or with a partner, that would be something that is absolutely feasible for a certain kind of film. Not for any film, but for a certain kind of story that it has like an art house character, or is a beautiful story, heartwarming, and delivers on many levels. That would be something that could warrant a limited release. There is still a market, as I said, for Blu-ray and DVD if it is a cult-like film, and if there is a deal to be done with a retailer like a Walmart or a Target, someone like that. Sometimes educational sales make a lot of sense for these particular movies if they have an academic value and if they have a cultural purpose. Those can absolutely be possible. International sales who sell our film around the world is obviously important for us to have, particularly the kind that knows how to handle low budget films. And then we should absolutely look into hotel and airline and ancillary rights that are also sold through the sales agent, which very often make a lot of money for low budget movies as well. Some of this is very obvious when you talk about common risks associated with low budget films. We mentioned before that the limited production value is a very high risk, and it is not just the production quality, it's the cinematography, it's the production design, it's the visual effects, it's the sound quality, it is the caliber of actors. When you have newcomer actors who overact, which I see a lot, particularly with low budget movies, you can basically not sell that movie. So it's very important to really keep the production value up on all the levels. Having talented actors, even if they're not yet A level, B level, or whatnot, but they need to be really talented. And all the other areas like cinematography, production, design, visual effects, sound, color correction, music, all these things are important because they impact the audience reception and they impact the saleability of the film. Oftentimes, top tier talent does not necessarily attach to a low budget movie. And so what we do is we either increase the budget if we want the top tier talent, or we are deciding we're going to do this low budget movie really with a really strong crew, and we are, going at least and spending money there. Many times the risk here is that the talent is absolutely not good. And then additionally, we have inexperienced crew that will cause a poor execution. That's a very valid and often seen outcome when people produce these low budget movies. There is a market saturation factor and a crowded marketplace, very stiff competition with projects that are low budget but have a higher profile. It's very hard to break through that noise, and you can really only do that if you have something special, and that's a very high production quality as well. There is a limited distribution component here because many times these movies do not get released in the theaters. They have often very limited marketing support because they don't have the money to market, and then sometimes they also get really bad distribution deals that are very unfavorable and will really limit the option for revenue potential. And that is because newcomer filmmakers don't know what a good distribution deal would be, or they simply make a bad deal because they don't want the film to collect dust at home in their shelf. All of that has to do with an execution of the film that is poor. That's when you're forced to make those not so great distribution deals. We could have a situation where the audience reception is spotty. We have negative reviews, we have poor word of mouth, we have a low audience turnout that can negatively impact the film's reputation. All of that has to do with, well, what is the film? Was it executed well? Is it a good movie? And that's when you find out. The financial risk is very high for these low budget movies for the above mentioned reasons that I just mentioned here. We have different ways of mitigating these risks with mid to high budget films. We don't necessarily have that mitigation strategy available to us with low budget films, which is why they are much riskier than a mid or a high budget movie, in fact. Quality control is absolutely important with low budget films, and it's not something that's often given. Script inconsistencies, I've seen a lot. Production errors, post-production delays, post-production issues, glitches, etc. All of this can compromise the final product because no one was really taking care of quality control components. And that will, again, give us a poor executed movie that becomes unsellable. And sometimes we even have legal issues. Producers that don't know what they're doing, haven't cleared the rights properly, haven't done the copyright properly. There might be an infringement going on. There's maybe a problem with the distribution or a talent deal, all of which can cause claims against the film and make it literally unsellable. I'm going to talking a lot about low budget films. Some finance terms for low budget films that I would like to take a closer look at here. We do have an investment amount that obviously we need to think about. How much do we need? What is required for the production? And then how do we include the equity investor in a way that is creative in regards to plugging them into a balanced finance plan? And also, how do we deal with the investors' creative opinions, if any? Sometimes that's a situation where when you have low budget movies and you have an investor who gives you a lot of money, they want input, and that could be good or bad. Profit participations are definitely something that is more applicable with low budget movies simply because there is not always the money to pay everyone. And here we need to be careful in looking at participations from box office revenues, from distribution deals, from merchandising deals, and from ancillary rights. And the way to look at that is you can have profit participation deals from certain distribution rights. Let's say just distribution rights, excluding merchandising, excluding ancillary. You can do a deal like that if that's something that people are okay with. And it gives you the option to have certain recoupment corridors available that could help you monetize yourself as a producer or the talent that you are in connection with this film, and also help the equity investor. Recoupment schedule is something that we are often seeing with low budget films to be a little bit distorted because of distribution deals that are just not ideal, and high fees and expenses that are deducted from revenues, making it very hard for a movie to generate any profits. I've seen movies that have distribution deals where distributors charge 35, 40, 50%, and sometimes even more. Makes it impossible to generate a profit even if the film has some kind of success. The rights ownership situation would be something that investors may require. Not necessarily, but they may, and that is often the case, or fairly often the case with equity investors. And then they obviously look at what other rights can I secure for myself as the investor from distribution, from merchandising, and from ancillary rights. So the equity investor is likely going to be in those waterfall revenue components because they take a lot of risk and they want to make sure that they get paid from any distribution revenue stream that comes in. The exit strategy in the financing terms would lay out how the investor can exit. It could be a mixture of you pay them and they just you buy them out, you just pay them a certain amount of money and they leave, or you put someone else in the mix that buys them out, buys their position. That is something that people sometimes do. And of course, you can figure out any other way for exit strategy that the investor is happy with. Many times exit strategies have to do with the fact that the film is being sold as a library title, and then the equity investor makes money from that sale. Now the distribution terms, they would include things like, what geographic territories are being sold and being granted, what are the distribution fees for anything. If there is a theatrical release, what is the P&A? If there are marketing and distribution expenses, what are they? Can they be kept? The release platform, on how the film is being released, on what channel, in what succession of release window even, could be part of the distribution terms. The release schedule also talks about the timeline and strategy for releasing the film, and that has to do with what else is being released and how is the film being released. Marketing and promotion to generate awareness for the film could be something that is part of the distribution agreement. If it's a revenue share deal, you would talk about how is the revenue being shared, how are expenses being deducted from the revenue before it's being shared, if that's the case. We can talk about overages in the distribution deal, where we talk about if a film performs very well in the box office and the minimum guarantee is paid and all the distribution expenses are paid and there's money left over, is that being split and how is that being split? And then we talk about delivery requirements that have to do with technical specifications as to what is being delivered to a buyer and then when is it being delivered. So the distribution terms are often the same, not just for low budget movies, but for mid and high budget movies as well. The financing terms are also often the same because they always deal with how much money is being invested, what kind of recoupment schedule, recoupment position will the equity investor have, what kind of profit participation will be given to the equity investor, when and where are they recouping, will they hold ownership, will they have approval rights, and what is their exit strategy. So the financing terms here listed for the low budget films, you will find very often applicable also for mid and high budget movies as well. So when we look at the profitability of the model of films between 1 million and 5 million, we can look at the theatrical as an option because sometimes these films actually will be able to attach an actor that's meaningful for a theatrical release and will be expanded into a limited release scenario, even if it's just for a few screens. And that is very helpful, especially when you have a film that has some potential award recognition components. Now, when we skip the theatrical release and we go straight to VOD, we can do a direct release to a digital platform that can be quite cost effective. And we can do that with SVOD or direct to digital, where we don't obviously pay P&A because we're not doing a theatrical release, and we can either get a direct placement where we get paid a revenue share, or we can do a licensing deal with a streamer. The same would apply with the cable network. We will likely do a licensing deal with the cable network, or the buyer here would give us a minimum guarantee license fee to broadcast a film. The international rights are just the same way, normally structured in a way that there is a flat fee that is paid to us as a minimum guarantee or license. There are some revenue sharing deals available in the international marketplace as well. Something to look into. Ancillary rights are not necessarily something that you'll find in the $1 to $5 million range, but when we talk about hotel or airline rights, I would say yes. But when we talk about books or spin-offs or franchises, I would say unless it's a horror movie that can be franchised, probably not so much. The hybrid I mentioned is basically a tailored distribution approach that would look at the specific audience, the specific and best way for this particular movie to be released, and how, meaning how do we manage the release windows, ideally to optimize distribution revenues. The risk in that range is that, yes, we could have budget overruns necessarily, or specifically here because, and same for low budgets, by the way, because these films are not necessarily bonded by a completion bond, because they may be too low in budget, the way it doesn't make sense. And if they don't have sufficient contingency, which oftentimes is not the case specifically for low budget movies, then they could go over budget, and then you have the risk of abandonment. Movie never gets finished. The upfront cast and crew cost should ideally be managed with, profit participation deals or deferment deals or maybe bonuses, so that the upfront costs are not so high for the film. Genres should obviously be managed in accordance with the demand in the market. So we need to look at what is selling right now in that budget range, what is successful, what are sales agents doing at the film markets, and what can they tell us is being generated with films that are similar to ours with maybe a similar genre. But that research is important. We do have to have a balanced finance plan. We know this. We've done this ad nauseum. And the director should be experienced or have a track record in this budget range, ideally. The sales agent we work with should also have a track record in this budget size, and should be bankable, because this is a budget range, the 1 to 5 million. Pretty much, I would say anything above 3 million, where pre-sales are possible and banking is possible. So this is why we need the sales agent to be a bankable sales agent. Some of this we've talked about when we talked about what is the right sales agent to choose. Some of it can help. Can use a refresher. Some of it we haven't talked about. Important for a sales agent is that they really have strong market knowledge. They know what's going on in the market. They know the trends. They can identify them. They can give us feedback as to what we should be doing with our script or story or project. And they need to have access to the distributors that buy this particular product. Very important. Their lineup, meaning other films that they sell, should be comparable to our project, and they should be known for this kind of genre and budget levels, so that the buyers know this is where we go when we want to buy this genre or a film in this budget. The agent must have a global reach. They need to understand the buyer's needs and preferences, and they need to be able to navigate those in a way that it's optimal for us when it comes to licensing deals. So we need to make sure the sales agent has very strong negotiation skills, not just in regards to the global reach, but in general, because we want them to get favorable deals for us. And of course, we want them to protect our rights. We don't just want them to sell everything off and then not get us a good deal. We want them to sell certain rights for a certain term, for a certain license fee that makes sense. We mentioned that we want the sales agent to be bankable so that they can secure pre-sales for us and enable a gap loan. When it comes to financing, we want them to be efficient. We want them to protect our projections, meaning we want them to be able to deliver on the estimates that they have given us. We normally want a sales agent to have a long-term partnership with us, but we also want the sales agent to have a long-term partnership with the buyers. We want the buyers to come back to do repeat business with this agent. We obviously want to continue to do business with them, but it's more important actually that the buyers want to do business with them. So that's why the partnerships and the relationships the agent has with certain buyers is very important. And they will tell us about that because we're going to ask about that. We want them to give us guidance in regards to our project and our packaging and our distribution strategy. That's their job, and that's what they need us to do, get guidance for in order for them to make more money and for us to make more money. The positioning is important with sales agent, and there are some that are great with festivals and markets, and there are some that are not, and they're just good with markets and not the particular festivals. It really depends on what the sales agent is selling and what they're known for to sell. They should promote the project very strongly. That's very important because we need to see that, you know, buyers know about it. We want to see that it's mentioned in the trades. We want to see that it's mentioned in the trades for being at this market, being a new title. We want to see that the sales agent is able to really promote our project the proper way so that people are aware of it. With challenges that we have with sales agents include the fact that they are not advocating for a film. So we want them to. We want them to advocate for the film. We want them to be excited with our film, and we want them to charge us feasible fees, not overreaching. We don't want to pay 35% to a sales agent or 40% or 50%. We want the sales agent to be relevant. We want them to have had recent projects that were sold in the marketplace, and we want them to have had recent deals that were announced in the market as well, because that's when buyers know this is a very active sales agent that has active and new titles all the time. So a lot of what we talked about in the low budget range is applicable also in the $5 to $10 million range. We want a budget that offers the opportunity to afford us to hire commercial talent and increase our production value, of course. That is a given for the $5 to $10 million range. The money needs to go on the screen, and very actively so. We do have additional revenue streams with this budget range of $5 to $10 million because it does include, or it can include, theatrical distribution. It can include ancillary and merchandising revenues. Obviously, the normal things like, you know, revenue streams from streamers, from networks, from broadcasters, etc. is a given, and from the international market as well, and maybe even from DVD and Blu-ray. That's a possibility too. This budget range is very versatile. It can offer us a lot of revenue streams, which is why this is the strongest. This is really the strongest budget range we have in the marketplace right now. This can change, of course. Revenue sharing situations where we have box offices, bonuses, we have profit sharing that is being applicable with talent or maybe with distributors and producers and investors, does happen to some extent in this budget range, but should be handled carefully because you don't want to give all your profits away because you're dealing with a title that has a strong library value and you want to keep that library value clean. So if you give a lot of profit participation to people, you're going to basically cannibalize your library. The break-even point for this budget range varies widely because it really depends on the genre, the star power, the marketing strategy, the competition at the time, on so many things. But these films definitely have a higher or a larger range of success than low-budget movies. The risk-return factor has to do, obviously, with the quality of the script, the quality of the talent that we attach, the market trends that are apparent right now, the distribution deals we made, and the potential returns that are hopefully coming into play here. And that has to do with how was the film executed. There's only so much we can do about that because the cast and director have a lot to do with that. We want an experienced director. We want a visionary storyteller because we want them to be resourceful. We want them to be strong. We want them to have solutions that doesn't cost money. We want them to really elevate our project in a way that the executed product is absolutely delivering on the projections that we have given. When it comes to cast, this is a budget range where you definitely want an A-, B+ level actor in a lead role. Essential elements here would include a very strong cast, an A-B plus cast. A very strong script, an A-B plus cast. We want to have enhanced production value and production design, cinematography, of course, top quality production and post-production. We want a strong marketing and distribution buzz, awareness being created through publicity, and we want enough contingency to cover potential issues in case we are not doing a completion bond company, which, by the way, at the $5 to $10 million range, I would highly recommend that you do a completion bond insurance. Let's jump up a notch to the $10 to $15 million range. Same thing applies here, pretty much, than the $5 to $10 million range, other than the fact that we can pay more for A-level talent, and we can even more increase the production value because we have more money available. The revenue streams are the same. The distribution is the same, with the exception that we likely will have a higher P&A amount because it could make sense to widen the theatrical lease for this budget range. So we could potentially have something where we have more screens than what we would do with a $5 to $10 million movie. So maybe we release this one on 500 to 1,000 screens, and we have the $5 to $10 million movie on up to 100 screens, depending on what it is. The break-even point depends very much here too on the execution of the movie, and the risk and return is the same then for the $5 to $10 million range, where everything has to do with the script, the talent, the market trends, and the distribution potential, that all of which is related to ensure profits. This is the same component as well for the cast and director. We want a track record proven, experienced director. We want a visionary person. We want someone who's bondable. We want someone who has a strong passion for the project. We want someone who is not a beginner, for sure. The cast definitely should be A-level in this budget range. And the essential elements are the same as well. Then we just talked about, we want a strong script. We want A-level cast. We want top production quality. We want people to know about the movie. And we want to have some contingency to cover story elements or things we want to shoot or anything where we can go over budget, which in this range, by the way, is also something that's covered by the completion bond company. So let's jump to the $15 to $30 million range. Now here we are in a situation where we do have to have a theatrical release, because this is the range where you become box office dependent. This is the range where you lose money if you don't have a theatrical release. So we do need a theatrical release. We do need someone to, ideally a studio, work with us and come up with some P&A, or have a P&A investor, but this is the range where a theatrical release is a must. The production quality being top in this range is also a must. You have to have an elevated story concept. You have to have top-notch production companies with exciting visuals. You want to have a very strong director, and you want to have absolutely viable A-level cast in a lead role. When we're looking at the distribution and ancillary rights, this is a situation where everything is possible. Theatrical, ancillary, spin-offs, franchises, all the merchandising you can think of, all the distribution to all the platforms, VOD, streaming, TV, studio, anything is possible in this range. And it must be possible in this range, because otherwise this movie in this budget range will not be profitable. When it comes to financing low budget films, we talked about options like grants, branding, crowdfunding, deferments, equity, music investments, and a combination of things. When it comes to options for mid to high budget range financing, you know what we need. We need, for the high budget, for sure, a studio deal. We do need pre-sales. We do need a senior loan. We do need investments. We do need non-recoupable finance sources. You know about these finance plans. We've done them ad nauseum. Now, this distribution components here would include ideally a studio deal for a higher budgeted film, where it could be a license, a co-production. It definitely needs to have a theatrical release guarantee, meaning we need to know how many screens we're going out into. For the higher budgeted film, that's an absolute must, because we need to be able to tell our international buyers we're going out theatrically on 1,000 screens, on 2,000 screens. We need to know, because that elevates the license fee we get from the international marketplace. It will also dictate the fact that the international distributors will take this movie theatrical, probably in the same wide way. This would be applicable for a high budget movie. For a mid-level movie, we can do a limited release situation, which will also elevate the licensing fees that we can get from the international marketplace. Streamer and TV deals will absolutely pay premium license fees for a film that is theatrically released. That's why it's important to consider that, because this will multiply throughout all the execution windows, the distribution execution windows. A theatrical release will enable larger revenues from international licensing fees, but also from streamers, from TV, and from home entertainment, specifically because these movies are often acquired, I should say, bought as DVDs and Blu-rays from collectors, as we call them. They want to own these kind of movies. IP-related revenues and ancillary rights are an absolute possibility. We talked about this just a moment ago. And the special screenings is something that we could do with the mid to high budget level as well, where we can have special event screenings, or we have special festival screenings, all of which will elevate the awareness for the movie, which will help sell it not just in the US but around the world. It's got to be listed, but we did talk about this. The project requirements for mid to high budget movies, they're similar to the project requirements we have for lower budget movies, because we want strong scripts, we want a competitive story, we want a script that can attract globally viable talent. This is now more the case for medium to high budget films. If a script does not attract talent, it usually means the script is not good enough. We want to cast globally viable talent, and we do that ideally by using a casting director and have them guide us to who we should go out to and what we should pay them. We want a top production, design, and cinematography team. We want a very strong crew that is very experienced. That's a given. And we want very strong post-production elements for effects, sound, and we want the top technology to be applicable for the medium to high budget range. For publicity and promotion, we want to be able to elevate the awareness in the public and the industry about our film. So these project requirements are absolutely essential to have for a medium to high budget film and have them in place. Distribution requirements, we want a theatrical release, either limited or wide. We want the P&A to be provided by the studio or an investor. We can do a digital simultaneous release where we go into the theaters at the same time, go on the digital platform. This is perfectly fine. This is something we can do with the mid to high budget range. We do have the option, as mentioned before, to have home entertainment physical media sold, and a national sales to theatrical buyers, digital buyers, networks, and other buyers will absolutely be possible, and increased license fees are possible due to the theatrical release in the US. We want to have a network deal that pays us a higher fee because of the theatrical release, and festivals will elevate the marketability if we are selected or win something with a top tier festival. And we do have the option here again to have additional revenues from IP related merchandising. One thing that's really important for mid to high level films is that we are very clear about the market demand and the conditions of the market, because market shifts can diminish profits very quickly for mid to high level budget films. So we want the audience expectations, we want to keep that in mind. The audience expects to see a visually and emotionally enhanced film suited for the big screen. That is definitely something we want to aim for when we produce a mid to high level budget film. We need to see what is going on with the competition. What are the mini major studios, what are they doing? Because the mini major studios are kind of our competition in regards to what they're releasing. And we must stand out. We must be able to compete with that. Our film must be able to compete with what the mini major studio divisions are releasing at the same time, or in the vicinity of when we're releasing our movie. We have to think about the global trends in regards to what genres are being sold right now, and we know it's action, thriller, sci-fi, fantasy, comedy, etc. because those are the genres that are geared toward a wide audience in the US and abroad, and that's something we should be focusing on with our mid to high level budget as well. We need to know about the technological advancements because we want to include them. The audience does expect high level production value incorporating these new technologies for visual and sound and other effects, and they are expected to be in our film when we do films in the mid to high level budget. Obviously, it's a little bit genre specific, but you got to know about them and you got to include them if your story calls for that. Marketing and distribution strategies need to focus on reaching a wide audience to generate meaningful box office and distribution revenues for our release structure. So we have to think about the higher the budget, the wider the release. The lower the budget, the more limited the release. But the box office will play an important role because there will be P&A paid by someone that needs to be repaid. The critical and awards recognition component is extremely important because it increases and boosts marketability and credibility for our film, and therefore also increases revenues from the US and the international distribution. So we are obviously interested in having top-tier talent push for that with extraordinary performances, but we also need to have unique stories that are absolute key for this particular strategy. Let's talk about the financing for the mid to high budget range. We know what these finance plans look like, and the one thing I want to point out here is that with higher budgeted movies, you definitely want a US deal that's above 35% of the budget. And you do definitely want a 500 to 1,000 screen release for sure, ideally with them paying the P&A. You're gonna potentially look at equity and should not exceed 40%. We always go with 35, but for a higher budget movie, you might need a little more. And in this case, 40% should be your maximum. And that should only be the case if you do have a theatrical release commitment from a studio or a strong US distributor. Otherwise, this equity is at risk in this high budget range. Pre-sales should give you license deals that are ideally 15 to 40% above the projected estimates. And that has to do with, this wide range has to do with how wide is the film released in the US. So if it's wider, the international license deals will be higher. If it's limited, they could be lower. So the 15 to 40% above what was projected has to do with how the film is released in the US. The bank financing, we understand. We want to have between 15 and 20% gap. We also want to push the bank to give us no or low discounts on these pre-sales, because for the mid to high budget films, pre-sales are usually done to very high level distributors and they should not be discounting them. So that's something we want to push for. We also want to push for low interest rates and loan fees because our distributors have a very high level of credibility and creditworthiness. The production partners we could work with could be the ones that could become an equity financier or financier, because when we have a mid to high level budget movie, there are certain companies that need to produce them and that need to put them into the distribution deals that they have that require a certain volume to be delivered to a studio or to a streamer, and they look for films like this. So they could be a good equity deal partner, or they could be giving us a loan of some sort. So look for production partners that are also financing companies that need to deliver a certain kind of product that you are producing right now. Venture capital is possible for high budgeted films, more so when we talk about slates, but it is absolutely also done sometimes on a one-off basis. Here we can talk about equity deal structures, we can talk about lending structures, and we need to make sure with venture capital companies that the fees are balanced because they have a tendency to be a little expensive. So this is the summary for week 4, module 4, and the key items for you to do this week is simply read all the module sections. There's a lot of information in there. And if you can't read it all, don't worry about it. Read the summary page. It has all the essentials that you need. But I do want you to have all the details in case you want all the details, and then you have all the details. And then, of course, watch the case study videos that will be in the modules, and then submit quiz 4 by Sunday. And I might add something for you to do, an additional key action item this week. So just check your Canvas calendar to see if there's something additional to be submitted this week. And again, if you have any questions, you know where to find me. So questions, if you have any, please reach out. A lot of the information that we covered this week was information that you in some shape or form have heard of before, either in the previous class or in other financing structures and other things we have talked about. But the goal for this week is to really dive deep into the intricacies of the varied budget ranges and how they are handled differently. So while the information might be similar, I want you to have a takeaway of how is that information applicable in relation to the different budget ranges, because you're going to be dealing with different budget ranges and they don't all work the same when it comes to financing and distribution. And again, email me on Canvas if you have any questions, or set up a office hour session with me on a Saturday, on an upcoming Saturday, for a one-on-one 20-minute online slot to discuss any questions you have.